He was collecting laundry when the bombs fell. At 7:48 in the morning on December 7th, 1941, Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller was below decks on the battleship USS West Virginia, gathering dirty clothes the way he did every morning. He was 22 years old, 6'3", over 200 pounds, the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, and the United States Navy would not allow him to fire a weapon. Not because he couldn't, because he was black. In 1941, black sailors in the United States Navy were permitted to serve in exactly one capacity, as mess attendants. They cooked, they cleaned, they served food to white officers, they washed their clothes. They were not trained in gunnery. They were not trained in damage control. They were not trained in anything that might put a weapon in their hands or authority in their voices. The Navy believed, officially, in writing, as a matter of institutional policy, that black men were not capable of performing combat duties, that they lacked the temperament, the intelligence, the courage. 6 minutes after the first bomb hit Pearl Harbor, Doris Miller proved every word of that policy wrong. He carried his mortally wounded captain to safety through fire and shrapnel. Then he walked to an unmanned .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun, a weapon he had never been trained on, had never been permitted to touch, had never fired in his life, and he started shooting down Japanese planes. He was the first black American hero of the Second World War. The Navy called him an unnamed Negro in its initial commendation. It took 3 months for them to release his name. It took 80 years for them to put his name on an aircraft carrier. Doris Miller was born on October 12, 1919, in Waco, Texas. His parents, Connery and Henrietta, were sharecroppers. He was the third of 4 sons. He grew up working the family farm, hard, physical labor that built the frame that would make him one of the strongest men on any ship he ever served on. His mother named him Doris because she had expected a girl. He went by Dory for the rest of his life, though the name never bothered him the way it bothered other people. At A.J. Moore High School in Waco, Dory played fullback on the football team. He was big, fast, and fearless, the kind of player who ran through defenders rather than around them. He was a good student. He was well-liked. And when the Depression squeezed the family finances past what the farm could sustain, he dropped out of school to help put food on the table. In September 1939, at the age of 20, Doris Miller enlisted in the United States Navy. Not out of patriotism, out of necessity. The Navy paid a steady wage. The Navy fed you 3 meals a day. The Navy would send money home to his mother. The Navy also told him on his first day that because of the color of his skin, he would serve as a mess attendant. He would cook, clean, and serve. He would not be trained for combat. He would not be eligible for advancement beyond the galley. He would wear the same uniform as every other sailor, but the Navy would decide what he was allowed to do inside it. Miller accepted the assignment. He trained at Norfolk, Virginia. He was sent to the ammunition ship USS Pyro, then transferred to the battleship USS West Virginia in January 1940. He became the ship's heavyweight boxing champion. Nobody on the West Virginia could beat him in the ring, and he settled into the routine of a messman in the Pacific Fleet. He served food. He washed clothes. He waited. At 7:48 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. 353 planes, fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, launched from 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, hit the American Pacific Fleet in 2 waves over the course of 90 minutes. The attack sank 4 battleships, damaged 4 more, destroyed 188 aircraft, killed 2,403 Americans, and wounded another 1,178. The USS West Virginia, the big Weavy to her crew, took 2 armor-piercing bombs and 6 or 7 torpedoes in the first minutes of the attack. The ship listed heavily, began flooding, and caught fire. Her captain, Mervyn Benyon, was struck by shrapnel from a bomb that hit the nearby Tennessee. The shrapnel tore open his abdomen. Below decks, Dory Miller felt the explosions and heard the alarm. He ran topside. The scene on deck was chaos. Fire, smoke, bodies, water rushing over the listing deck, Japanese planes screaming overhead. Miller was knocked down by an explosion. He got up. He saw sailors pulling at debris and carrying wounded. Nobody told him what to do. Nobody gave him an order. The battle stations he might have been assigned to, if the Navy had thought a black man deserved a battle station, were either destroyed or manned by the men who had been trained for them. Miller found his captain. Benyon was on the bridge, bleeding badly from the stomach, unable to move. Miller, 6'3", 210 pounds, the strongest man on the ship, lifted the captain and carried him to a sheltered position behind the conning tower. Benyon was dying. Miller stayed with him until other sailors arrived to provide aid. Then he looked around for something else to do. On the port side of the bridge, a .50 caliber Browning anti-aircraft gun sat unmanned. Its operator was either dead or gone. The gun was loaded. Nobody was firing it. Doris Miller had never been trained on an anti-aircraft gun. He had never been trained on any gun. The United States Navy had decided, as a matter of policy, that his hands were good for carrying trays and washing sheets, but not for pulling a trigger. He walked to the gun. He grabbed it. He pointed it at the sky, and he started firing. Japanese planes were strafing the deck, dropping bombs, launching torpedoes. The harbor was on fire. Ships were sinking all around him. And Dory Miller, a mess attendant who was supposed to be below decks collecting laundry, stood at that gun and fired into the Japanese attack. He had no training. He had no technique. He had a pair of hands, a boxer's instinct for timing, and the understanding that the planes above him were killing his shipmates, and somebody had to do something about it. He shot down at least one plane. He claimed 4 to 6. Eyewitnesses corroborated multiple kills. The exact number has never been settled because nobody was counting. They were too busy trying not to die. He kept firing until the ammunition ran out. Then he helped carry wounded sailors to safety through the fire and flooding. He was one of the last 3 men to leave the West Virginia as she settled to the harbor floor. Even after abandoning ship, he continued pulling sailors from the burning water and helping them to shore. He didn't stop until there was nobody left to help. In the days after Pearl Harbor, the Navy compiled a list of commendations for the men who had distinguished themselves during the attack. Among the citations was a mention of an unnamed Negro who had performed with extraordinary bravery aboard the West Virginia. Unnamed. The Navy knew his name. They chose not to use it. For 3 months, Doris Miller was America's first black war hero, and America didn't know who he was. The Navy wanted a story about white officers and heroic sailors. A black messman who had grabbed a gun he wasn't supposed to touch didn't fit that story. The black press wouldn't let it go. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, and other newspapers demanded the Navy release the name of the unnamed Negro. Civil rights organizations pressured the government. In March 1942, the Navy finally confirmed that the man was Mess Attendant 2nd Class Doris Miller. The reaction was immediate. The black community embraced Miller as a symbol of everything they had been saying for decades, that black Americans were just as capable, just as brave, just as deserving as anyone else in uniform. The NAACP pushed for Miller to receive the Medal of Honor. The Navy gave him the Navy Cross instead, the third highest decoration for valor. On May 27, 1942, Admiral Chester Nimitz personally placed the medal around Miller's neck aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor. Nimitz said, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made in the Pacific Fleet to a member of his race, and I'm sure that the future will see others similarly honored for brave acts." Miller was promoted from mess attendant second class to mess attendant first class. He was still a messman. The Pittsburgh Courier ran a photograph of Miller with his Navy Cross next to a photograph of a white Pearl Harbor survivor receiving an officer's commission. The caption read, "He fought. Keeps mop." In late 1942, Miller was sent on a war bond tour. He was the first Black American allowed on the speaking circuit alongside white war heroes. He gave presentations in Oakland, in his hometown of Waco, in Dallas, and to the first graduating class of black sailors from Great Lakes Naval Training Station. His face appeared on a Navy recruiting poster under the words, "Above and Beyond the Call of Duty." The poster was aimed at Black Americans, a recruitment tool designed to draw black men into a Navy that would still make them cook and clean. Miller was cautious about the attention. He was a quiet man who didn't like speeches. In one of his few letters to the Pittsburgh Courier, he wrote, "You have opened up a little for us, at least for the ones who are following me, and I hope it will be better in the future." A little. He didn't ask for a revolution. He asked for a little. In the spring of 1943, Miller was assigned to the escort carrier USS Liscum Bay. He was still a mess attendant. Despite his Navy Cross, despite the recruiting poster, despite the bond tour, the Navy's position had not changed. Doris Miller was a black man, and black men served in the galley. On November 24, 1943, the Liscum Bay was operating near Butaritari Atoll in the Gilbert Islands during the Battle of Macon. At 5:10 in the morning, a Japanese submarine fired a torpedo into the ship's stern. The torpedo hit the aviation bomb magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. A column of flame erupted hundreds of feet into the air. The ship broke apart and sank in 23 minutes. Of a crew of 900, 644 men died. Among them was Mess Attendant First Class Doris Miller. He was 24 years old. His parents were notified of his death on December 7, 1943, the second anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1973, the Navy commissioned a frigate named the USS Miller. In 1991, a bronze plaque was dedicated at Pearl Harbor in his honor. In 2001, Cuba Gooding Jr. portrayed him in the film Pearl Harbor. And on January 20, 2020, 78 years after he grabbed a gun the Navy said he couldn't touch, the United States Navy announced that its newest aircraft carrier, CVN-81, would be named the USS Doris Miller. A Gerald R. Ford-class supercarrier, the most powerful warship ever built. Named after a messman from Waco, Texas, who was collecting laundry when the bombs fell. It is the first aircraft carrier in United States history to be named after a black American. It is the first to be named after an enlisted sailor. The ship that will carry the Navy's most advanced aircraft, protect the nation's most critical interests, and project American power across every ocean on Earth, will sail under the name of a man the Navy once listed as an unnamed Negro. He was 6'3", 210 pounds, the ship's boxing champion. He could cook, he could clean, and when nobody else was there to do it, he could shoot down Japanese planes with a gun he'd never been trained on. They gave him a mop. He grabbed a gun. And 80 years later, they gave him a carrier.